There we go. Great, perfect. We should be live right now on YouTube. We're also recording at the same time, and it's great to see everyone here. Okay. Okay, so I think this is about time to get started. Well, good evening, everyone, on a very, well, it's been sort of raining, sort of sunny day here. It doesn't know what it wants to do. It's one of those days in Glasgow. Or actually, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. And I know this is quite a global audience, so please do feel free to share with us where you are right now. I am Dr. Dimitra Fimi. I am Senior Lecturer in Fantasy and Children's Literature here at the University of Glasgow, and also co-director of the Centre for Fantasy and the Fantastic. Most importantly for today's event, I'm the principal investigator for this AHRC-funded research network, Future Voices of Scottish Science Fiction and Fantasy. And I'm delighted to be joined tonight also by my co-investigator, Professor Esther McCallum-Stewart, who's Professor of Game Studies at the University of Staffordshire. The Future Voices of Scottish Science Fiction and Fantasy privileges underrepresented Scottish voices of science fiction and fantasy working across different media, so literature, gaming, film, art, all sorts of other permutations, with an emphasis on ME, and LGBTQ communities, as well as practitioners with disabilities. In these dramatic times, we ask how creative practitioners imagine future worlds and respond to rapidly changing global circumstances like the COVID-19 pandemic, concerns and anxieties as expressed in, say, the Me Too or Black Lives Matter movements through science fiction and fantasy creativity. The network is the first step towards building a strong collaboration between academics, creative practitioners, fans and other stakeholders, with a view to contributing to the agenda and conversations leading up to Worldcon 2024, which will be held here in Glasgow. And my co-investigator, Professor McCallum-Stewart, is of course also the chair of the Glasgow Worldcon. We would like to thank the AHRC for funding this project. For those of you who may not be aware of it, the AHRC is the Arts and Humanities Research Council, a British research council supporting research and postgraduate study in the arts and humanities. And to have secured funding from the AHRC for a science fiction and fantasy project is something that Esther and I are still sort of pinching ourselves about. We would also like to thank the project steering group, made out of science fiction and fantasy publishers, editors, academics, Glasgow Worldcon and other convention committee members, and also the Scottish BIPOC Writers Network. And you can find details and biographies of all of our steering group members on the project website. Tonight's event is the first of 4 public events the network is organizing, all of which examine the ways in which contemporary science fiction and fantasy practitioners visualize the future, build worlds, and bring their diverse voices to momentous global changes through the lens of science fiction and fantasy creativity. And tonight's event, as you know, focuses on inclusive world building in science fiction and fantasy across different media. And I'm really delighted and very excited to be welcoming 4 brilliant creative practitioners we will be hearing from tonight. And you can see them on your screens now. They are writer Hal Duncan, screenwriter James T. Harding, poet Rachel Plummer, and filmmaker and comic writer Etienne Kubwabo. So between them, they've won multiple awards and they have explored world building across a number of different media. And I'm really looking forward to learning from their creative practice tonight. So in a minute, I will introduce each of them in more detail, but let me first talk you through briefly the format of the event. So first of all, each of our speakers will begin with a reading or with a short media extract based on their medium, and will give us their opening response to the main research question of tonight's event, which is how is world building used as a creative practice in science fiction and fantasy to imagine different alternative worlds and address concerns about inclusivity and diversity. And I will then open the floor for questions from all of you, and I will try not to abuse too much my chair's prerogative and ask all of my questions first, because I know I already have lots of questions, but there we are. So if you do have a question, please use the Q&A box, and please indicate if the question is specifically for one of our speakers or a more general question for all of them. Please refrain from using the chat for questions, because they can get easily lost in everything else that's happening in the chat. But please feel free to continue using the chat as you've been doing already. I can see it moving on the right here to post general comments and reactions and all of that. I should also remind you that this event is being recorded and live streamed via the YouTube channel of the Centre for Fantasy and the Fantastic, and the recording will remain there and on the project website. The chat will also be automatically saved so that we can trace and preserve ideas and suggestions and feedback. Often really good reading suggestions come on the chat, and we tend to lose them if we don't save it. We would love for the conversations that will start tonight to continue beyond the event itself, and for this reason we have opened a dedicated forum on the Centre's Discord server. Please join us there to continue the debate afterwards. And in addition to all of this, the network has also commissioned 4 early career academics, one for each event, to provide a written theory-informed response to the discussions, questions, and issues each event will raise. And each of these scholars is working on different aspects of intersectionality, inclusivity, and diversity. And their written responses will be published on the network website, and we will let you know once all of that is ready. So tonight we're delighted to be joined by Dr. Alice Kelly from the University of Edinburgh. Last few practical things, I promise. Many thanks, first of all, to Madalena D'Alessio, who will be live tweeting the event via the network's Twitter handle. If you're also tweeting about it, please use #FutureScottSFF. Many thanks also to Hannah Barton and Grace Worm, who will be helping out with a post-event Discord discussion. Please be reminded that the event falls under a double whammy of codes of conduct, those of the Centre for Fantasy and the Fantastic here at Glasgow, and also that of Glasgow in 2024. And last but most definitely not least, enormous gratitude goes to Marita Arvaniti, our network administrator. Without her, the entire thing would fall apart. So thank you very much, Marita. So without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker. And we're beginning with Hal Duncan. And Hal is the author of Vellum and Ink, Testament, Escape from Hell, and numerous short stories, poems, essays, even some musicals. Homophobic hate mail once dubbed him the sodomite Hal Duncan, sick. And you can find him online and on Twitter reveling in that role. So Hal, over to you.
Hi. Yeah, I guess what I want to do is kick off with a little short reading from the Scruffians series of fiction. And I thought this was kind of appropriate because of what I've written. This is maybe the most kind of world building. It's a series of short fictions and novellas, and it's as much about exploring a world and creating a world as anything else. But it also, I kind of think, kind of illustrates my approach, which is maybe a bit kind of, I don't know, maybe a different angle from what we're talking about in terms of world building, because I kind of have mixed feelings about world building. I think partly I kind of feel, there's M. John Harrison's famous statement, "The clomping foot of nerdism," something I kind of are like way back. Remember agreeing with and thinking that my approach, I prefer the term world blazing. Is not about kind of constructing, but more about taking a kernel of an idea and exploring it and seeing where it goes, rather than sitting down and kind of trying to map out a world as you go. So here I'll do a little reading and then get into explore that a bit. So this is from a short story, which is kind of told as a monologue and not really a story per se as much as a monologue. called an alphabetia of Scruffian names. A is for apple. A Scruffian god is Apple, and a fine fellow he is too, the pipsqueak, named for his rosy cheeks and sweetness. Ain't no choir boy can sing as angelic as Apple, not even orphan, because it's him what invented singing in the first place, so's the world did have rhyme and reason. There's 9 Scruffian girl gods what follows him around everywhere he goes. The mouses he calls them, because he learns them his songs, then they scurries round the world, guised as mousies, whispers them in our ears whilst we're asleep. An whole song speeded up into the teeniest squeak. B is for Bananastasia Roman Hopper. Now, she says she's a Russian princess what had her family taught, had to go on the lam all across Europe, snuck her way in a boat for London, right? But got snatched by the wave takers on the docks, sold to a brothel after they fixed her, she was. So all them fine guests could have the pleasure of popping her cherry each and every time, it growing back and all, each and every time. And we don't catch diseases, of course. More than a little fib in our fable, going by when we nicked the stamp, but not where it matters. C is for Cursmidgeon Hugh Tyke. Him over there what's scowling like a rook scofflaw playing horsey for a scrag. Yeah, don't be fooled by the pint size of that scamp. That there Q stands for quick temper on account of he was fixed furious. Took 3 of them to hold him still till they put the stamp on him. And even then, he bit a finger right off one of your waste-taker general stickmen. He did. Spat it right in the bugger's face. Never heard no one who can swear like Tyke. Turns the air black and blue. Most times he opens his mouth, he does. So I'll leave it at that. And I guess what I wanted to talk about in terms of the question was, or to demonstrate with that was, the idea of kind of actually just taking a core idea. The core idea of this of Scruffians is a stamp, which you place it once on a child or a person, and it reads them everything they ever are or were. You place it on the second time, and it stamps that into them to fix them like that forever. So it's a kind of a riff on the Lost Boys of Peter Pan. They don't grow up, they don't age. If you damage them, you spring back right back to how they were damaged. So they're perfect in the Victorian era for child labor. So it's kind of, and the whole thing is a kind of a way to explore kind of the abuse of child labor through the ages. It's about class, it's about the abject, and but it's very much kind of not something that I kind of sat down and thought, okay, I'm going to map out the whole history. I jumped in at points, and you can see there, I'm just riffing. I'm taking an idea for a name and giving a history. So, like, actually take it, and kind of the way I look at it is, rather than building a world, oftentimes I'm kind of going in. Well, okay. Well, I think part of it is that when you look at the idea of diversity and inclusion. To me, the risk with world building is that when you're constructing a world, you're constructing that from a bastion of privilege. World building in the past has been done so much, and particularly in kind of the world of fantasy, from this straight white male perspective. So you're leaving out things. And if you're looking at the idea of inclusivity and diversity, to me, the risk there is that you're looking at that from within the bastion of privilege and going, how can I, as the great paternalistic, in my case, not straight, but white and male, try and include and bring in the other? And to me, that's always already failing. That's to always already fail, is to take the paternalistic stance, take this kind of privileged kind of idea, and that's how you fall into tokenism. And that's how, and it's also, you know, in my work as a book doctor, I see a lot of writers, you know, who are bringing in diversity, but bringing it in a very stereotyped way. And you get they're regurgitating tropes. They're regurgitating tropes which are colonial era, like racist as fuck. And so where I'm kind of approaching it is not to like build a world, but to break a world. The Scruffians is taking our world as it is. And it's from the outside, from identification as the abject, as the queer, the other, trying to break in trying to take, like, get in at the foundations and tear it apart, break things down, subvert it. I'm thinking of it less as a matter of inclusion and diversity, but rather as invasion, subversive insurgency. So yeah, that's my take on world building, and I will hand it back to yourself.
That's lovely, Hal. Thank you very much. World breaking, I love that. I think I might use that in one of my next lectures on this. This is excellent. Okay, we're going to move on to Rachel now. So Rachel Plummer is a multi-award prize-winning poet who lives in Edinburgh and co-author of Char, which is a pamphlet of poetry. Rachel received a cultural commission from LGBT Youth Scotland and LGBT History Month, funded by Creative Scotland, to write a collection of children's poems based around LGBT retellings of traditional Scottish myths and stories, resulting in the publication of Wayne in 2019, which I absolutely adored. So Rachel, over to you. I'm looking forward to your contribution.
Thanks very much, Dimitra. I was so excited to be invited along to this because world building and inclusive world building is kind of part of the reason why I wrote Wayne. So I'm going to try and talk a little bit about that, if that's okay. Basically, my perspective is that I write children's stories and poems ranging from kind of picture book age up to teen and young adults that are LGBT inclusive and very much with a focus on folklore and fairy stories. So more of the fantasy side than the sci-fi side, although I write more sci-fi stuff for grown-ups actually. But the reason why I started writing Wayne, which is, I've got it right here actually, product placement, it's my book of LGBT retellings of Scottish folklore, was because my background is as a storyteller and I love telling stories. And when I had children of my own, I was telling them a lot of stories, and I realized that a lot of the stories I was telling, a lot of the books I was reading weren't very inclusive. They didn't have people in them like us and like our family. They didn't have families like ours. And I went looking specifically for books that had LGBT families, LGBT people in them for young people. And what I found is that there's kind of two types, and one is more common than the other. And that's, so the first one I'll talk about is this more common one, which I like to call the Little Helen Has Two Mummies books, which are where the story, such as it is entirely about the LGBT thing. It's an educational kind of book aimed at a kind of a child or a family who it's presumed have never encountered this before and want a simple way to explain it. So that the example is, you know, little Helen has two mummies, but don't be mean to her when you see her at school, even though she's very different from you. Which is, it's important, it's necessary, but the kind of stories I was looking for were stories where queer people and people like us just simply existed within the universe of the story, where they just were incidentally people like us there. So that's my perspective on trying to include LGBT people and all different kinds of people within the kind of the world of the stories and the poems I'm writing. And obviously historically in a lot of folklore and in many other cultures that aren't kind of Western European, there are a lot of LGBT people already in folklore, and sometimes in our culture that's been removed or glossed over, and what I'm kind of trying to do is just find it again and put us back into the story and into the world. And also something that I think is really relevant is that when I was writing Wayne, LGBT Youth Scotland, they're a really great organisation, and I was looking at a survey they did in 2016 of Scottish LGBT youth, and comments kept coming up from them that they really wanted greater LGBT representation in various kinds of media, not just for themselves, but for straight cis people, so that the first time they encountered a trans person or a gay person or an asexual person wasn't that kid at school, but that it was already something that existed within their world and their universe. They already knew it and accepted it as part of the world. And I think that's what you can do in SFF. You can make these ideas, which maybe can seem scary to some people or different or outside of their experience, make it part of a world. And then when it's encountered in the real world, maybe it's not as difficult for people to kind of understand and comprehend. So I wanted to give you an example of that by reading one of my poems from Wayne, and then a little tiny extract, which is actually the first time I've read anything from this, of a picture book which is being published soon, and I can't really say too much about it, but I've got a little extract of it. So I'll start with the poem from Wayne. So this poem is called The Wolver's Daughter. Wolvers are kind of like a bit like Scotland's answer to werewolves, but they don't change between wolf and human. They're always kind of part wolf. So this is The Wolver's Daughter. This is the child of the wolf, the child that stalks yellow-eyed through Caledonia, the hungry child howling at snow with bared teeth, the child that worries sheep. This is the brave child, beloved of her fathers. They clothe her in wolf skin. This child is grey-pelted, sharp with the prey scent of rabbit, biting at the year's thin legs. Child of the cairngorms, full-throated, she runs between her fathers on the heights of Ben Macdui, shunned by croft and castle, by humans fearful for their cattle. This child is feared for her freedom, the power that comes with breaking from the herd. She survives the Highlands' bitter winter, furred in the warmth of her people. This is the daughter of the wolf pack, of the white moon. And so that was an example of kind of queer people just existing. So it's about this child who, and it doesn't really say, you know, maybe she's queer, maybe she's not. It doesn't really say anything about her, but it mentions that she has these fathers, an unknown quantity of them, rather than a mother and a father, or mothers. And it's just small moments like that that I wanted to include, rather than making it the whole focus of, oh, and by the way, she's got 2 dads, and talking specifically about that. I wanted to talk more about what it was like to be a wolver and to be a daughter of a wolver, and what that might be like. So for my extract from my picture book, this picture book is kind of about gay marriage, but really, and more importantly, it's about giants. So it's it's the story, and obviously it's aimed at a very young reader. It's a story of a young boy who gets an invitation to go to a wedding, and it's a giant wedding of 2 giants, and they both happen to be men, but that's not really a big deal in the story. The main thing is that it's giants, and this kid goes to the giant wedding and is really amazed by all the giant stuff there, and is a little bit scared initially, but then not so scared by the end of it. So this is a little extract from the giant wedding. I went to the wedding, climbed up on a pew, and I did all the stuff that most wedding guests do. Admired the giant carnivorous flowers and waited around for what must have been hours. I made polite small talk with giant Aunt Clara, who wore her best dress and a whalebone tiara, and great Uncle Finley, who lives up a beanstalk. These giants were experts at really big small talk. Then at the first bash of the organ's big keys, the doors were flung open, and in with the breeze came 2 giants in tuxes and pink silk cravats, so tall that the roof brushed their matching top hats. One carried the dawn and the fresh morning dew, and said it was good luck to bring something new. The other held late sky that clouds wandered through, and said this was something old, borrowed, and blue. I stared in amazement. It really was wondrous, these magical men who were proudly humongous. And then with a nod and a wink and a smile, they started to walk hand in hand down the aisle. So that's just a little teeny bit from, it's called The Big Day. It's, yeah, so that's kind of a way where, again, the queer people just literally exist, but the story is like a fun fairy story. It's just that we exist in the world of the story, and I think that's really important in literature. It's really important in children's literature, and it's something that we don't see enough. There's this kind of feeling, especially in children's literature, that we want it to be very safe. We want everyone to have, you know, a very kind of traditional mum and dad family, and a very traditional house, and a very traditional life. And it's heartening to see that there's some pushback against that now. But I think especially when it comes to fantasy and folklore and fairy tales, which, you know, if you've got giants, why can't you have gay people? It's just, yeah. So that's my take on inclusion in world building.
That's lovely. Thank you so much, Rachel. That was brilliant. So it's sort of recreating our world, really, isn't it, that you're talking about here, sort of giving it a, yeah, excellent stuff. Okay, we're going to move on to James now. James D. Harding. James D. Harding is a queer screenwriter living in Edinburgh with his partner, 2 cats, and an alarmingly large collection of tarot cards. Credits include Cops and Monsters, and he's the production editor of the science fiction magazine Shoreline of Infinity. And I think we have a clip that we can play. Would you like that played first, James? Yes. Okay.
Great. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this event. I'm so excited to hear all of the other panelists' thoughts and to discuss what we're talking about today with the audience afterwards as well. I wanted to use this time to share a bit about the origins of the Loesch project that you just saw the trailer for, which will provide the context for the rest of the discussion. I am one of 3 writers that are working on this show. The showrunner is Fraser Cool, who is a Glaswegian screenwriter who wanted to see something Scottish on screen that connected to his heritage and featured Scottish actors and was written by Scottish writers. He was frustrated with the way Scotland being portrayed on screen tended to be very fantastical and unrealistic, like Outlander, or very gritty and crime focused like Trainspotting, and he thought that there should be something that was somewhere in between those 2 things. One of the things that's different about writing for television is you have multiple writers and you write as a team. You don't necessarily have control over the world building of the show that you're writing for. But in this case, the 3 of us, Fraser, Debbie Moon and myself, are creating the world in collaboration with the various producers, which is then being pitched out to other production companies and broadcasters. We've now been through 6 or 7 completely fresh iterations of the concept of the show, changing all sorts of things about it, from who the main character is down to where it is set. Everything's always in flux, and part of my role on the team is to keep track of all of those different versions and help us to figure out what's going on. From a diversity and inclusion point of view, what's exciting about writing a television show is you don't, if you want to write about a marginalized group which you don't have the personal experience of being part of that group, you can literally hire somebody from that group to come and write an episode of your television show, to be part of your writer's room and inform how the show develops. And one of the things that I've really noticed working on this project, and lots of other television writers report the same thing on their own, is that this promise of a television show being very diverse and having lots of voices contributing to it is very rarely actually realized, because the money side of the industry really restricts what you can actually do. And the logistics of filming and how expensive everything is can really take away from that urge to make something inclusive, to make those experiences that, you know, the audience feels the hand reach out of the screen and touches them and shows them something they knew to be true about the world. For this particular show, we've been working with a Gaelic consultant, Agava Bryan, who took us on an amazing research trip around the West Coast He showed us stone circles in people's gardens, castles, fairy circles, all sorts of amazing things that only somebody really invested in that culture would be able to show us. And he's been working with us on incorporating Gaelic into the show and making sure that the mythology we're using is based on the Gaelic mythology and not on the Irish Gaelic mythology, which can often get confused if you're using Wikipedia as your source for these things. We've been working internationally. We've got a producer in Australia who's been on board from the very beginning, and we've been talking to people in the States and otherwise. And something that I've really noticed with this show as compared to our previous show, Cops and Monsters, which we just filmed ourselves with crowdfunded money, was that there's a lot more concern and discussion about diversity and inclusion. Because on the one hand, everybody wants to be, all of the writing team want to be as diverse and inclusive as we possibly can for artistic reasons. And the money sees this as an opportunity to attract greater audiences to their offering. But also there's a lot of concern about maybe losing the mainstream audience as they see it. So the sort of concerns we've had raised by various producers was that having the main character be bisexual was confusing for the audience. They would only understand that, yes, Dimitra's expression is perfect there. But other producers have said that it was fantastic we had a bisexual main character, and they were really drawn to the project precisely because of that. At one point we had a producer tell us that having a non-white protagonist would restrict our ability to get star casting and get the show to be made. So overall, I found that when we did Cops and Monsters and we were more in charge of our own project, it was a lot easier to incorporate a diverse cast. And we even had some token straight characters in that show, which I was quite pleased about. I want to emphasize, I don't think that it's necessarily that there are individual bad actors that are out trying to make television less interesting. It's just that we're all operating within a very capitalist system, which is excessively cautious about anything even vaguely new, because everything is so expensive to make, and we're all struggling just to survive. Even the people that seem very successful and seem to have a lot of money, when you look at that in the context of the film budget, it isn't actually that much. I think that another thing that's different about television is that you're going to reach a lot more people, especially if you're writing a science fiction fantasy television show, because it is expensive to make with all the special effects. You have to be able to reach a huge mainstream audience with that show to justify the investment in it. And that means that you have the opportunity to reach more people and a corresponding responsibility to be responsible in how you're portraying people from the global majority or queer people or whatever it might be you're concerned about. But the reality is that these large properties often celebrate token diversity, but then they leave a sort of emptiness in your mouth, all of the spike from it, the sort of stuff that Hal Duncan is so good, where you take the whole world apart and build it up from the beginning. It's hard to imagine how that could exist in a large television show in the current climate. But I'm hopeful that that one day that will be possible. To finish, I want to talk a bit about my motivation as a queer person to write these stories. But when I was a young person, I was so electrified by any occurrence of a queer person that I saw on screen or read in a book. Sometimes it was good, sometimes it was bad, and that representation actually stopped me from becoming a happy person as an adult. I had to work through the damage that did, but it was always absolutely transfixing when anything like that happened. A really positive memory I have is discovering a story by Hal Duncan that was in Strange Horizons. I was a teenager. It's called The Disappearance of James H. That's my name. And it was about, well, people should go and read it. It's on the internet on Strange Horizons. It's about queer experiences in Peter Pan. And I was just so excited that somebody had written something that was about me and that wasn't afraid to be nasty and gnarly. But those experiences as a young reader and audience member weren't always positive. And I think a lot of my motivation, and probably the other writers here also feel this, is the sort of urge to correct that and make something that if I were a young person today, I would be positively impacted by and excited by. I'm wary of taking on responsibility for changing a system that I'm not structurally in control of, because I can write as many diverse works of literature as I want. It doesn't mean that they're going to be published or produced or put out into the world. We don't have the power in the capitalist system that we operate. But as I continue to build a life as a queer person and increasingly feel happiness in that life, I think there is the material to build something really positive for the future.
Thank you so much. That was really lovely. And it's nice to make that link back to Hal's work here and sort of coming full circle and seeing that influence, down the line. And also fascinating stuff about the the restrictions of, the particular industry you're working on. I'm sure we'll come back to this in questions. And let me move on to Etienne now. And our fourth speaker, Etienne Kubwabo, is a filmmaker, comic writer, and has written, directed, and produced award-winning documentaries, films, and over 400 music videos and commercials. He's currently telling the story of Scotland's first Black superhero through KE Comics' comic book Bits of War. His debut feature film, The Difference Between Us, is currently in post-production and will be in theatres in 2023. And there are more exciting projects on the way. Can't wait to hear about them. So again, Etienne, shall we play the clip first? Yeah. Yes. Marita, if you don't mind, that would be great. Lovely. Thank you very much. Etienne, over to you.
Hey, so yeah, where to begin? I feel like all the other speakers have kind of like went back and touched every point, but I'm gonna just sort of take myself, talk about my sort of process on world building and the way I've always wanted to do what I do. I'm like, I've been introduced, I'm a filmmaker and a comic book writer and creator. I guess for me, these things started when I was like 5 years old. I remember I used to get in a lot of trouble whenever my mom went to work. She'd be like, Etienne, no much TV, you have to do your homework. And then every time she left the house, I'd be sitting watching TV. And then I got in trouble for that, right? So I realized that we had this old 80s broken TV at the back of our house. So every time she went to work, I would get my brothers and sisters to lie in the grass. And then I would put my head through the back of the TV because the inside parts were not in. And then I would start acting out like Spider-Man stuff I'd seen on TV, Batman, or The Legend of Tintin. It's this sort of French animation that was super popular in Congo. And I remember those were like the best times of our lives growing up. I remember my brothers were like, Etienne, what are you doing? You're crazy, man. And then we had the best time. And then coming to Scotland and sort of being introduced to this new world, new country, sort of started struggling to fit in. So as I went to college, my English wasn't that good because I'm from a French-speaking country and we've got another language in Congo, which is not obviously English. So I was struggling to fit in, and it took me over a year before I can come out of my shell and start filming stuff, creating stuff. And then with that happening at college, I started facing a lot of injustices as well. Racism, being stopped by the police, searching, people throwing stones at our house, because we had this family house where we were all staying with my siblings and my mom. And then I started wondering if I did belong here in Scotland. So I had these sort of anxieties and frustrations and things I wanted to change in the world, but I could not. And then at one time when I went to watch Avatar, no, it's not Avatar, it was Black Panther that came out. And I remember as a kid, I loved Spider-Man, remembering the story of Stan Lee and how he created these characters. When I watched Africa being represented in Black Panther, that 5-year-old Etienne woke up again. I was like, I'm going to create a world where I can sort of fight these injustices that I'm facing right now. So reasons why I created that, a lot of my friends were sort of battling the police or getting into trouble and they get locked up, criminal records. I was like, what approach can I use to sort of deal with these anxieties and things I cannot change in the world? And that's how Beats of War came to be. So Beats of War really is a story based on a character's journey coming from a planet being attacked by nanorobotic invaders and comes to Earth to find answers to save his planet. But when you look at it, the planet where the character comes from represents Congo, where I come from. And the playground of the story is Scotland, which is my new home right now. Before I created Beats of War, I wanted to be honest with myself. I asked these questions to myself. I'm like, how can I make this as original as possible? How can I make it as personal as possible? And how can I make it that this story it's something that's maybe I've used it as an inspiration of other creators, but I made it my own. So I remember growing up. I mean, I grew up my mom is my stepmom. She's not like my biological mom. So when I growing up, when my mom died at 8 months, I didn't really have that childhood connection with my mom. So I felt like I wanted to have this conversation with my stepmom, but she's not really open. She will give you all the love, give you everything you need, but she will not have these conversations with you about who you are, your mom. She's not that open in that way. So it frustrated me a lot because I felt like I want to talk about it. So the frustration of that, adding with the police injustices, I was like, I need to find my own escape. And that's how Beats of War came to be. I started researching on planets that are way beyond. I'm a big fan of NASA and all these photographs they release online. And I found out that there's a planet called Kepler Planet 452b that is sort of a mirror world of our planet that could inhabit life, but you would take about 500 light years to get there. I was like, that could be the planet where the character comes from. And then I made Scotland the sort of playground of the story, but also Scotland being this sort of home place that I've made home now. I wanted to sort of pay homage to the city. That's why the villains of the story are based on the Razor Gang who ran the streets of Glasgow in the 1920s, but also bringing in like things like landmarks and also music instruments from Congo and making those into sort of like spaceships and warships, so that I make all my designs really unique to what's out there. How I got that idea is I love directors like Ridley Scott, who've made like Prometheus, James Cameron, and they always show their behind scenes and how they come up with ideas, and they look at sea life on things in space and use those as inspiration to create what's in their world. So I also wanted to bring the culture of Scotland and Congo together in a sort of science fiction story of me dealing with what's like to be a black man in the world we live in right now. And obviously when you check out Beats of War, you realize that every character is real people, real friends and family. So I wanted to make it as personal as possible, and also make my mom that I lost growing up the queen mother of this planet, so that I can have these conversations with her throughout this story. So I feel like Beats of War and world creation for me, I wanted to be as personal as possible. I wanted to include my friends, but also with music being like the universal language that we all do adore. If you go to like music festivals, or if you see people listening to good music, there's love, there's that unity, there's that thing that brings people together. So that's why my character's main superpower superpower is sound manipulation. And also every comic book I release has links back to Spotify, something you can play in the back and sort of connect with the story. So with Beats of War, I wanted to be as honest with myself as possible. Is this something I'm gonna create and just put out there? How will I care about all the designs, all these worlds that I've created, and how can these worlds mirror the world that I live in right now? So that's why sometimes my friends will pick up bits of it like, Etienne, this character looks like you. I'm like, yeah, it's me. That's my sister. And I brought back my culture with the opening scene that you've seen in the trailer of the character with the designs. That's based on ancient African designs of some cultures in Africa, basically in Central Africa. They use that. And also obviously looking at the Titan crane. You guys should Google the Titan crane if you know, from Glasgow or Scotland. The Titan crane is a beautiful landmark that was used on shipyards like ages ago. So I made that into a mothership in Beats of War, and then used a music instrument called the mudul in my country, sort of made out of this flute that is dried, and then you put a wire on it with the wood, and then you play music. So I used that into a warship. That's me bringing the two cultures together and just using my little world of Beats of War and Etienne universe, just creating that world that I've imagined in my head from a really young age. So it's quite a very interesting journey for me, and sometimes I don't really know everything at the start. Some things I just have an open book and draw ideas as I go, script one done, but I keep researching about planets, my culture, and just also of having this conversation through each one. And I'm like, what would I have told my mom at this point if I was able to have this conversation with her? How do I represent her and keep her alive in this story and keep this to heart? So yeah, Beats of War for me is an escape for me. And even talking about inclusivity and characters that look like me, when I was creating it, actually I didn't think about that, but I just was so excited in just having that voice and being out there and fighting these injustices in a story which is a mirror to the world that we live in. There's things we look at the news that we can't control, but if you can sort of inspire people, the younger generation, to change the world for the better, that's what I'm here for. So yeah, I don't know if I've sort of covered everything that I should be covering, but yeah, Beats of War is an exciting project for me, and that's why you see with Beats of War, the beats represents the music and the war is what the character is trying to change in the world. And if you see this picture over here, that's my character. That's my little sister that I made into this character called Nai, and this is my friend Sean, who's the villain of the story. So kind of like sort of a story of this character's journey on trying to sort of discover themselves in this world they do not understand, this world that they feel like they don't fit in, which is a mirror of things that are happening today. So I'm not this kind of person who goes on Twitter and be like, oh, this should change, this should change, but I can tell a story through comic books and films, and hopefully that can change the world for the better. So yeah, thank you so much, and I was really very excited to speak today, and yeah, I can't wait for the questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That again, all of your talks in many ways have linked with each other in so many different ways, right? I was thinking about, Etienne, how you talked about your own experiences, the binding force, about of the world as it is, rather than sort of structuring, which goes back again to what Hal started with. Hal was saying, we can all come back now, actually. Can I get all of our speakers back on screen? Yeah, Hal, you were saying earlier on, you don't sit down with a plan, right? That's not how it works. And it seems like, you're all talking about that it's a more organic process than this. And I think there is this misapprehension, I suppose. I get a lot of questions from students on that as well, that people who work with this, with this idea of world building, which is more, I suppose, as academics sort of imposing it on the work that creative practitioners do, that you sit down with a plan and you have to map it all. And it doesn't seem to work that way, from what I'm hearing from all of you and from, other practitioners we've known about over the years. It is much more organic. Would you like to come all on and comment a bit on that, on the actual process and how you've already started this? I'll come to you if that's all right first.
Yeah, no, yeah. What Etienne was saying, that chimed with me a lot. You're talking about it's, not so much this kind of concept of world building. We have this kind of going back to Tolkien and sub-creation, this idea of sitting down and inventing a language and inventing mapping out a place and things. And no, I mean, like, actually, when Etienne was talking about bringing stuff from his own life, that's very much my approach. I go in and doing the research, and yeah, I mean, like, a lot of this scruffy and stuff is diving into Wikipedia, going into like researching history and mythology, and it's taking mythology. Oh, I'm going to rewrite that. I'm going to like redo, take like the first little bit that I read, where it's the scruffy character called Apple as Apollo. It's Apollo and the Muses, and it's about these. It's kind of and it's actually kind of about that process. It's a part of the scruffing is about the kind of because they're monologues told as by these kids, these kind of they've been stamped in this way and gone rogue. They live in cribs and squats basically, and every crib has a fabbler. One of them that's nominated to tell tales. Fable, they call it fables. They're fibs, what we babble to explain to the young'uns how things are. And a lot of those, they're an unreliable narrator. They're taking stories from the past and reinventing it and putting themselves into this. They're making their story. They're like redoing stories for the underclass that they are, for people that have been on the margins, people that are abject. So yeah, I'll pass over actually.
Thank you very much. Would Rachel or James, would you like to come into this?
One of the things that's common in television is that we will write what is called the show Bible, where all of the setting information, the world building for the show, and most likely a plot summary for the whole overall direction of the show, each individual season, and then each individual episode, all compiled together into one source, which can then be shared with all of the different writers that are contributing pages to the shooting script, and indeed to the crew that are going to be using this to invent costumes and find settings and all of the magic that they have to do to make a television show actually be filmed. So we do have to think consciously about world building, but it isn't, as you say, that you start with the world and then you can move on to do the plot, and it's a linear process. You're constantly revising what the world can be. And even at the end of season 2 of Cops and Monsters, we already had 12 episodes under our belt, and we're still adding new things to the world and thinking of how to improve our inclusivity of marginalized groups.
So that's fascinating. So it does have to be codified up to a point because you're working with a team of people, but it's not, there is no before and after sort of situation. It is a dialogue between the two, which is, yeah, great to hear.
Until it ends up on Wikipedia because someone's written a summary of the show, then you're kind of stuck with it.
Fair enough. Yeah, I suppose you set precedents, right? You set some things and then it's difficult to change them. And Rachel, I wanted to just bring you into this from, I thought your perspective was fascinating in the sense that this was about sort of re-enchanting our world, but with this inclusivity lens right there. Would you say that that's what you're doing? You're reinventing a version of our world rather than sort of thinking about an alternative? I don't know what the difference is actually, but that's an interesting question, and whether that's conscious or whether it's just a more organic part of your process as well.
Yeah, well, I always say that my background is in science. My degree was in nuclear astrophysics, and so that's why I've always been drawn to science fiction. But what right now is mostly folklore and myth. And I always say that I think folklore occupies a similar cultural space to science in that there are ways that we can understand the world. There's stories that we tell about the world. Most of us aren't splitting an atom and actually looking at it ourselves and working it out. We're taking somebody else's word for it. Somebody's telling us the story of what's inside an atom, and that's our story then for how that part of the world works. And that's kind of what folklore is as well. It's a way of looking at something about the world and explaining it or talking about it and thinking about it. So I think it very much is about our world. I think that's what folklore is all about. And that's why it's so important to put put people back into it who've been taken out, people who are part of the world but aren't reflected in the world of the story. Because this is a really important way of understanding the world and our place in it. And if we have no place in that world, it can feel like there's no place for us in our world. I know that what James said about being young and kind of trying to encounter queerness in different forms of media really rang true for me. And I remember I read a lot as a child. I was quite a nerd. I didn't have super many friends. It was mostly books for me as a child. And I remember just feeling like there's nobody else like me in the whole world. I'm the only one. And people shouldn't have to feel like that. They shouldn't have to feel like that. So things like fairy stories, which are so ubiquitous, I kind of want to put us back into that. And then it sort of gives us permission to be back and visible and present in the real world.
Right. Thank you so much. I have one more question, bigger one for all of you, and then I promise I will start looking at the questions from the audience. But I was rereading recently Sami Schalk's book on disability, race and gender in Black women speculative fiction. And it's a fascinating book, but she makes a point about how science fiction and fantasy and any of these genres of speculation actually can take us can take creative practitioners into two directions. On the one hand, it's allowing us to imagine the world otherwise, to envision an alternative world and future, or alternative past, indeed. But it also can be a space to imagine the worst and to sort of think what could happen if these, the current inequalities and injustices are allowed to continue. And I think, am I right to think that, you've sort of taken a stance on this, and from what I heard, from your opening bids, is that you're more leaning towards the positive, trying to reimagine positively rather than explore where this could go, and because both have political affordances, both have social justice potential really there. So where do you sit in that split? And I think, Hal, you might have actually explored both sides of this.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of coming at that from a both sides perspective. I think I'm kind of, my approach, certainly actually the Scruffians, you're kind of reconstructing history entirely in a very dystopian way. As an analysis of fundamentally capitalism and privilege. There's I talk about actually folklore, as Rachel was saying. There's one of the kind of ideas that I use in there is that you have the blood libel against the Jewish people and the Roma, that they steal babies, is in this mythos a bold-faced lie in order to justify the taking of children, that have been stolen back from the Jewish and Roma people. It's predatory capitalism and predatory privilege. And so it's to take those kids, take them away to be stamped and used for child labour. And there's an erasure of identity there. There's these kids, although they escape from those, the Scruffians in general have escaped from their slavery and say live in these squats, but they've had their identity erased and overstamped with this. They're taken away. They can't go back to their culture. They've lived, if they've lived 100 years, they can't go back to the village that they came from. So it's kind of exploring that. It's a very dystopian and dark and twisted way of looking at things. You've got one character, the narrator character, Godfabbler Hal Dunkling Esquire, who's my kind of alter ego in these things. His backstory is he was actually used for as long as you cut round the stamp on that's stamped on you and peel it back, you can do whatever. You can use this kid. So this kid has been used in the 1700s as a live vivisection by your Royal Society kind of posh white straight man who's in this position of power and privilege. So this is dark as fuck, but it's fundamentally, it's all there's a kind of I don't think there's any stories that don't end up with the Scruffins coming out on top. I mean, it's always rebellious. It's always about the resilience of them, and the metaphor of it is that they will always spring back. A Scruffin is nothing if not resilient. So, and it's all about comeuppances, and it's all about this kind of people the abject, living in the margins, living in the interstices, and from there kind of striking back. And yeah, so it is very kind of in some ways, utopian in a weird way as well. Yeah.
Yeah, the two sides of the same coin in some ways, isn't it? Utopian, dystopian. Yeah. Etienne, can I come back to you? Because your model seems to be more on the hopeful side, and the sort of subverting and changing and giving it an alternative, which is the positive, rather than exploring, where it could go if it continued in the negative way.
I think for me, actually, it's a great point you brought up there. I'm working on another comic book which is part of the same universe called Jelani, and without giving so much away, sometimes I watch things like the hurricanes, tsunamis, and things that are happening in the world, and it kind of give me a flight. What if something catastrophic happened that would take us back to the old age, like where the first human were, and we have to start from zero? That always scares me so much. So I've created this comic book that sort of covers Earth 2.0, which is a mirror world of our world being affected by these sort of catastrophes, and our planet as we know it, continents, are sinking below underwater, and we are sort of all going back to the roots of being in a jungle and be able to survive to sort of save this whole planet. So going back to us, Mother Nature, to save us from what we've done. So these things that I'm scared of sort of have inspired me to create that. I know with Beats of War, it's sort of like a more of a positive thing. So me finding my place in the world, me sort of trying to discover myself in this sort of utopia that I've created. But Jelani is going to go really brutal and show what could happen if we didn't do this. And I think for me, it's something, when you go on, you're, for example, addicted to fast fashion, or you're doing things that you think is not good for the planet, you don't really think about it that much. But when I recently watched this documentary on Netflix, and I was like, I need to start thinking, I need to think how I can be responsible for the planet, and how can I sort of contribute to saving the planet, because small actions really matter from one person to another. So all these fears have sort of inspired me to create these stories. And with Jelani, it's going to go really brutal, and it's going to be like a mirror world of 70 years from now. This is what could come. What could this planet do, so that the Earth One, which is us, can learn from and hopefully save their planets. So I'm always trying to explore, like with Jelani is something that came 2 years after I've started Beats of War, and I guess all these things you have to live and experience and travel and see things that are happening to sort of create, open your mind to imagination and things that you can sort of explore, and really interesting points that you can bring into your story. So I'm always open to that as well, but I'm always tapping into my fears, things that I'm scared of, things that I don't have answers to. And I think that would be quite an interesting one to sort of release and see how people react from. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you. James or Rachel, do you want to come into this point at all?
I have loads of really big thoughts. I'm just going to try and condense them down, because as I said, folklore, fairy tale is my thing. I love fairy tales because I think one of the reasons they've been enduringly popular with children is that they often are very bleak. And I come at this as well as somebody who's chronically ill and has a disabled child and a disabled partner. I come at fairy tales a lot from the perspective of disability as well. And I think one of my favorite fairy tales that deals with the subject of disability is The Steadfast Tin Soldier, who he has one leg. And it's so brutal, that story. It's not like the modern Disney-fied kind of versions of these stories where you know, as long as you're a good person and your heart's in the right place and you believe, everything will be fine. He does everything right. He's a good person, and it still ends, you know, really horrifically for him. And I think that children like that because it's true. And I think that there's a lot, it's difficult as a modern writer, because as James mentioned, you want to get published, and people are, especially at the moment, they're not massively keen to publish incredibly dark stuff for children, especially when I'm writing a lot for very young children. But I think there is something in fairy tales that can be really dark, really scary, really bleak, and really true and honest, that speaks to children, because they know that a lot of the time they're being fed kind of a nice lie about the world, and they can see the truth in it. And I liked what Hal said about the kind of the stealing of the children. I think about that so much. Again, some of my poems in Wayne and some of the stuff I've written about is a lot to do with the stories about the changelings, of children that were stolen and replaced. As a neurodiverse person, I think that's actually probably a lot to do with autism, because it's often around the time that autism would start to become apparent in a person, in a child, that the stories would say, and they'd been stolen and replaced by this strange otherworld child who wasn't the real child. And obviously then that's used to justify kind of quite horrific abuse often in the stories. But I write a lot about that. I have several poems about changelings in Wayne, where I kind of explore the concept of found family and try and put a more positive spin on that. But yeah, I have big thoughts about that. It's a cool question. Thanks so much.
Excellent. Okay, yeah, James, yes, please.
I think you're really right to talk about sort of two polarities of diversity. You have the sort of honesty type of diversity, where it's about diversity is not the right word, you know what I mean? The honesty type, where we're trying to represent what it's actually like to be from a marginalized group, and we are probably speaking to other people that have the same experiences, and it's about sharing that and sort of a collective healing from that. And then we have kind of aspirational representations, where we're looking at showing how we think things ought to be. And that's why science fiction can be particularly exciting, because you're free to imagine anything and everything. I was particularly inspired by the disability-themed issue of Shoreline of Infinity, which I'm allowed to be excited about because I wasn't the production editor when they did that. But in it, quite a few of the writers are disabled or neurodivergent people, and they're imagining a future where they have the accommodations that they need to enjoy life and be part of society. Some of the stories are about how those accommodations work. Other ones are about completely different things, and the disability just isn't an issue for these people. I found that really exciting to read, and that gave me a lot of inspiration for how I might think about what queerness could be like in the future as well.
Good stuff. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to start. There's quite a few actually specific questions that are quite quick to answer. So I might go through some of those first. I think Angela's question about neurodivergence has already been answered, she was saying here. But a question about Etienne, you talked about using friends and family in your work. Did the publication of Bits of War change your relationship with the people you put in? This is sort of the practical side of things. And also, are you doing the art as well as the writing for this?
Yeah, I think I would say that I've been a filmmaker and a comic book creator. Comic books have been part of my life from a young age, but I've actually started creating them for like maybe 5 years ago. But films, it's been like about 11 years. And I feel like when I created Beats of War and started having these conversations with these characters that I've created in this world, we're on number 3 at the moment. Issue 4 comes out in December. I feel like my relationship with my stepmom and my brothers and sisters and friends has sort of grown. So because we create music together, there's part of the comic book. I'm having these sort of open conversations with my stepmom, and I think I've sort of opened my mind to sort of I feel free. There's something within me that is like it's out. It's there. And before I used to be really angry and stay with myself, but now I'm there promoting the book, speaking to people, doing workshops in school, keeping kids inspired, asking kids to give me ideas for Beats of War. I'm just this free spirit. And with Beats of War, being an artist, I do the penciling on and the script of the comic book, draw sketches of all the elements that go in the comic book, like spaceships, the costumes, the world. I do all these sketches and everything, and then send that over to my artist who does the inking and the coloring for the comic book. So it's sort of a collaboration between myself and an artist, and I've got a script editor. Obviously, coming from a French background, I need to always have someone to check out my work to make sure that I'm saying something right. And yeah, it's a good team of creative people that I love working with. They become my brothers. I've actually never met Ben, who's an artist on Beats of War, but we talk on Zoom, and it's become this sort of brotherhood and friendship that has grown from just creating something that we do enjoy and love. And I think with Beats of War becoming my escape, it sort of has freed me. I would say I feel happy. I feel like a more positive person than I was about 5 years ago.
Sure, thank you very much. There's a question right at the beginning, which is an interesting and again practical one, but I know we have lots of creative practitioners in the audience as well, which is what is it like to be part of this marginalized group and yet self-promoting as an author or artist? How do you, it's interesting how it's phrased. How did you learn to be okay taking up space? Why shouldn't you is my answer, but then I'd like to hear, was there ever a conflict about that? I know James talks about the restrictions within the industry he's working on. Rachel was talking about how the publishing industry wants certain things at certain times and other things it doesn't. How do these questions get resolved? How do you position yourself as a writer from one of these from the margins and promoting?
I guess I can jump in.
Go for it, Hal. Yeah.
I mean, I am terrible at self-promotion. I'm really, really bad at self-promotion. I can't do it for shit.
You're very good at promoting your garden, Hal. You need to do more.
I can happily occupy space. Happily make. I don't have any problems with that. But I think there's a distinction between actual self-promotion and taking space and being involved in it. I have no problem with the latter, because I think, long story short, I think I was actually quite a shy and diffident kid, very much kind of the quiet nerd, but kind of through the kind of bullying and secondary school, I ended up being basically being kind of probably that far from your kind of school shooter style, like absolutely like bug fucking insane. What happened? Well, actually, practically what happened was that my brother died when I was like 16, and that sent me completely off the rails into full nothing mattered. Now, after that, I was like a full-on nihilistic, nothing mattered, and that's part of why I think what I ended up doing was kind of having a fairly mad period where I joined at that point the Glasgow SF Writer Circle, and it was like 18, 19 or so, gone up to Glasgow Uni, and I was wearing a chicken bone necklace around my neck. I had a waistcoat that I'd self-painted with all sorts of mad shit on it. I was absolutely nuts. During the first Gulf War, I would go into Glasgow Uni wearing full-on green face paint, in the kind of Apocalypse Now, nominally in protest against the first Gulf War, but largely just because I was off the rails. But what happened of that was, I think, psychologically speaking, it was. I think what happened was that the ego that I had as a kid broke down completely. It just collapsed, and what came in was the Ed, this kind of wild, fucking free reign character. It kind of came out in the writing itself. and Velma Inc. there's a Jack Flash character, which is kind of like the id. It represents this kind of fire-haired, wild side. And yeah, basically I gave myself license. I think what happened was that complete nihilism gave me license. If nothing matters, then it doesn't matter, then it doesn't matter. That's the kind of, if you're fully at the bottom of the pecking order, if you've got nowhere else to go but down, I think there's the Derek Jarman and movie Caravaggio has the knife that Caravaggio has. It says no hope, no fear. I actually, in part of my madness, I had a Bowie knife that I'd swapped for a pack of tarot cards, and I had the words "Next Bay Neck Metu," no hope, no fear, like scratched into that. And I think, so I think that's where there can be, I think, a positive turnaround if you go, right down to the bottom. If you're going through that kind of, if you have that long dark night of the soul, then you can come out of that with a fuck it attitude. Fuck it, fuck the world, fuck anybody that tries to stop me. I'm just going to go for it. Nothing can stop you. And I think that's, I guess that's where I'm coming from in the in that kind of the return of the repressed. It's the
sure. I think it comes through in your fiction very clearly for me, as at least, Hal. Yeah, no, that's great to hear. Anyone else want to comment on that, on this idea of how do you position yourself and promote yourself, and this idea of taking space?
I don't know if anybody else wants to speak, but
you go, Rachel, and then Etienne.
I thought that was really, really beautiful, Helen, and really real. And I have a completely, what now feels quite light and overly practical response. But I think one of the main ways that you can become comfortable with promoting your own work, or being proud of your own work and letting your work take up space, is by promoting others, especially others from different marginalized communities, others whose work you really like or really care about and want to champion in some way, and just promote the hell out of that. And then you sort of think, well, what would I say to them? I'd want them to promote their work too. I want them to do well. And maybe that's a way into kind of being able to take up space with your own work as well.
Rachel, interestingly, you just touched upon the last question that I can see here, but Etienne, you go first, please.
I think for me, I've always had this attitude that no one is coming to save me. I've always had that from a younger age. So when I step out of the house, out there in the world, I'm like the meanest shark in the ocean. So this is just the attitude that I put on everything. With Beats of War, when it came out, I knew that no one knew me and no one cared who Etienne is anyway. So I sent out free 500 copies of the book. And I said, if you did love this book, take a photo and tweet me, tag me on Instagram, whatever. And I got over 250 people doing that. And that's how self-promoted started. And my family always ask me, Etienne, how have you been posting about Beats of War for 2 years? I'm like, guys, I'm passionate about this. I love this. I love doing this. And up to this day, I would say that Beats of War is almost selling 25,000 copies independently. And when I was doing that, when I was starting, everybody was like, mate, like, bro, people don't create comic books. This is not the sort of thing you should be getting in. Those are like bad friends. I sort of shut everything off, and I just followed my gut. I'm like, I need to get my voice out there. I need to do something I'm passionate about, something I'll feel excited to wake up in the morning, get my scratch book and start drawing spaceships. I need to be excited. If that excitement, that fire dies away, and then that's the end of Beats of War. So that's never died, and I've just kept going. It's more like driving, going to Edinburgh from Glasgow and all the lights have gone off. You know, your headlights can go as far. You don't see far into the future, but just that space where you can see is enough to give you faith to keep going. And that's just the way I've been looking at life. I just put good energy out there, do the best I can, be passionate, and the universe always responds.
That's lovely. I like this metaphor of the light, and how far you can see. That's very, very liberating in many ways, isn't it? It's as far as you can see, and that's fine. Excellent. James, would you like to come into this as well?
I think that the fear of self-exposure is something that a lot of writers struggle with. And I would love to tell you the way to get over it, but I myself have not got over it, so I will not be doing that. I once did a Writers' Academy where the tutor made us write live, and our computer screens were projected onto the wall so that everyone could see what we were writing as we went. And the idea was to try and trick you into facing that fear of exposure and overcoming it. It didn't work for me, so I'm not sure I recommend it for anyone in the audience. But I do hope that the person that wrote that question and any other writers who don't feel that they're worth, it's worth promoting their own work, putting their stuff out there, I hope that they will be encouraged to make themselves do it, because there is a community out there that is interested in what you are writing. And when you find the right people, they will respond in the way that you're hoping they will to your work. And the only way to make it happen is to get on with it and do it.
Sure, lovely. And
yeah, just another practical notice, like, yeah, actually the Glasgow SF Writer Circle for me was very validating in that sense. Even back in the early days where there was only like a couple of us that were queer, simply on a class level, actually, looking at it on a class level, as a kid from who grew up in a shitty housing scheme in Kerwinning, I never thought for the world that that's actually more of a barrier, I would say, for me to think of like an occupying space. I did not fucking expect to be a published SF writer. I was like, I'm from fucking Kerwinning. Nobody from fucking Kerwinning becomes, gets into the field that is inhabited by these giants like Samuel R. Delaney. And I now know Samuel R. Delaney. I've had dinner with Samuel R. Delaney. And I was like, oh my God, I've met my hero. But it was, for me, this writer circle, going to this writer circle as an 18-year-old, 19-year-old, meeting other people who were all actually believed that they were all writing with the aim of publication, all believed that they could eventually get published. They were all just serious about it, and that kind of made me realize that actually this is maybe not such a daft idea at all. It gave me permission. Yeah. So yeah, I think what James is saying about community is very much so, and I think I will actually throw a shout out for the GSFWC, particularly at the moment, because there's now a lot more like queer writers there. It's a much more diverse group than it was when I first joined. And yeah, I think there's I hope that I'm kind of not on the forums much. It's a Glasgow SF Writer Circle. I see one of the chat.
I think we should be promoting this, and I know on the chat I can see lots of other members of that circle, which is really lovely to see. Sure.
If anybody that's looking for a community and based in Glasgow, they're writing in SF and fantasy. I think in the past it has got so big that it's had to close to new members, but I'm not sure what the state is at the moment. There's certainly a community there that is so I think hopefully somebody that's in the GSFWC will be able to let us know whether they're accepting new members at the moment.
Sure.
I think.
Thank you very much. Well, we've come to 4 minutes before the end. Of course, we have only scratched the surface of the questions, as always happens in these events. Some of them I think we answered as we were going through your different sort of positions. But there's also lots of questions asking for suggestions for reading, etc. So it would be brilliant if we could continue, especially the suggestions questions on the Discord, because there will be a big community there to sort of crowdsource some ideas of other things to read outside our immediate experience and outside and also thinking about these own voices work that a lot of you have been touching upon today. So I'd like to thank all of our speakers today. I absolutely enjoyed this so much, and again it made me think about the sort of theoretical, critical things that we're talking about with my students that I've been lecturing about. In some ways, it sort of changed the ways I'm thinking about some of these big concepts and big ideas. And I'd like to just remind everyone that this is just, as I said at the beginning, the first out of 4 events. We have the next event on the 7th of December, which is all about representations of change and the future in science fiction and fantasy worlds and narratives. And we've got Kirsty Logan joining us, Tanya Roberts, Lorraine Wilson, and we'll have Dr. Taylor Driggers as our academic who will be writing the response for that. So do please join us for that and book your free ticket via the Eventbrite as per usual. And as I said again at the beginning, please feel free to join us on Discord and continue the conversation there. I'll be there, I'll be checking. I'm just excited to see what else will come out. We are hoping to archive some of this as well, especially when it comes to reading suggestions or quotations or the sorts of things that will be useful for continuing these conversations. And also just to say before we end that we focused on world building today, but in many ways the themes of those 4 events are very much overlapping. Future, social change, challenging the canon, all of these things in many ways feed into each other. So it's really nice that in many ways all 4 of you touched on all of the 4 themes of our events, while we were mostly focusing on world building today. So I'm really, really grateful for your contributions, and thank you to everyone in the chat as well. It's been lovely to sort of try to keep track of all of your amazing reactions and for all the questions, and apologies we didn't get to all of them tonight. Okay, I think this is it for us for tonight. We'll let you go and get a drink or a glass of wine, whatever it is, and hopefully we'll see you at the Discord very soon to continue, and in the next few days as well. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.